What's up, everyone? Welcome back to my channel. This is Lauren Leslie with Lauren Leslie Studio, and in this video I'm going to take you through 3 different types of painting where I'm painting the exact same painting in watercolor, gouache, and acrylic. So in this screen you'll see watercolor on top and gouache on the bottom. So let's dive into what you need for watercolor first. So what you need is watercolor paper, which is included in this sketchbook. This is actually a sketchbook of watercolor paper. You need brushes that have soft bristles. That's going to be the best thing to use for watercolor and for gouache actually. And you definitely need a jar of clean water. So you can also get, there's 2 different types of paper that you can get when you're painting on watercolor paper, and you can get either cold pressed or hot pressed paper. I tend to like cold pressed because it is more textured and just helps me kind of control my watercolors a little bit better, whereas hot pressed paper is going to be smooth and the wet colors are going to run just a little bit more. So watercolor is also, of course, activated by water, and you can reactivate it with water once it's dry. However, it is going to have like a little bit of a, it's going to be a little bit noticeable. It'll have a little bit of a quote-unquote cauliflower effect where you are reactivating it. So you might want to get the whole area wet again if you are going to be reactivating dried watercolor. So you'll also want to work from light to dark. So you'll see that in this kind of initial little filling in of these flowers, I'm kind of doing a lighter layer first so that I can go back on top and add some darker details on top of this lighter color. It's really difficult because with watercolor, the lighter areas are achieved by just having a lot of water. So it's really difficult to use white watercolor paints. However, if you are needing a little bit of a highlight on your watercolors, you can add a little bit of gouache, add white gouache to your watercolors and kind of mix those. But as you'll notice on the bottom here, I am using gouache, and you'll notice that it just has a lot more of a chalky matte finish, whereas the watercolor is a lot more translucent and kind of bleeds into each other. The gouache is more dense and it has more pigment, and it can also be activated by water. However, there is acrylic gouache, which if you want to watch my other video in my studio vlog number 4, then you can kind of see the difference between acrylic gouache and regular gouache, but here I am using regular gouache. Now in this next video, you'll see that I'm using acrylic on top, but I'm actually still using gouache on the bottom. So the gouache video is going to be the same video, but I'm just going to finish letting you or filling you in on the gouache. So gouache is a little bit of a denser paint when it compared to watercolor, and it has more pigment, and you can also work from light to dark or dark to light. The dark colors do dry lighter and light colors do dry darker, so it's good to keep that in mind. And gouache is just such a great medium for flat illustrations, and a lot of illustrators just love working with gouache. So on top you'll see that I'm using acrylic paint, and I just like to fill in the background first because I already knew what my drawing was. But generally with acrylic paint, you can use a canvas, a stretched canvas, or canvas paper. You can use soft or thick bristle brushes. Thick bristle brushes are going to hold more paint. So if you want a thicker, more textured, painterly look, you might want to go with a thicker bristle brush. And you also want to have clean water, and you could also use watercolor paper or bristle board, but if you're going to use that, I do recommend gessoing your paper first and taping it down. Otherwise, the paper is going to warp quite a bit. However, canvas or canvas paper allows the acrylic to go on much more smoothly. So once the acrylic paint is dry, it can actually not be reactivated with water, unlike the gouache and the watercolor. So once it's dry, it's basically waterproof, but this can also be a good thing because it allows you to work light to dark or dark to light. You can always paint on top if you made a mistake, which is a lot harder to do with watercolor. It generally comes in bottles or tubes, and it's a lot cheaper than watercolors and gouache, which is definitely a plus. So it's also really great for kind of a painterly effect and just getting lots of thick texture, as you'll see in this other painting I did that I'll put up on the screen here. So acrylic is just really great for a more painterly style that has a lot of texture. With this painting, I kind of still was painting flat, I think just because I had already painted it in gouache and watercolor, and I kind of already had an idea of how I wanted it to look, so I was a lot more careful with this acrylic painting on top. However, you can get a lot thicker and get that really painterly look. You can even use a palette knife with acrylic paints if you really want to get more textured. And I was using a softer brush here, so you'll see that because I'm using a softer brush with these acrylic paints, it is going on a lot thinner and a lot flatter. And that's just because I kind of already had my sketch drawn out, and I really just wanted to kind of stay in the lines and really get this exact same painting that I had already painted in gouache and watercolor. But yeah, I mean, if you want to get a looser, more painterly effect, acrylic is so great for that. And it kind of also has a similar look to oil paint, and you can just layer and layer on and just get the page super thick. But unlike oil paint, it really doesn't have the harsh odors or chemicals, which is so great. And so with this painting, it still kind of has a little bit of a dull finish. It's not quite as chalky as the gouache, in my opinion, and you can layer on again to get more luminosity with the paints, but acrylic compared to oil is going to have less luminosity than the oil, and I would say that the watercolor has a lot more luminosity than the gouache has here. But that is pretty much it for all of the differences between acrylic, gouache, and watercolor. So just enjoy the rest of the video. Make sure to click the bell and subscribe to my channel, and you can finish watching the rest of the painting.